Welcome to another episode of Tiny Talk. Today, we are so grateful to have Harrison Tang, the CEO and co-founder of Spokeo, join us. So let's start with, can you introduce to the audience, Harrison, what does Spokeo do?
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me here. So Spokeo is a leading people intelligence service that helps about 15 million users a month to search and connect with others. So we organize about 14 billion records into easy to understand profiles so that people can connect, maybe find their long lost families and friends, or small, medium-sized businesses finding new customers, or protect themselves. We help about quite a bit of people like doing a lot of these. One of the things that people don't realize is 8% of searches online are about people. So this is one of the things that we're trying to fulfill that market need.
Great. And, every organization has been impacted by COVID-19. So I'm just curious, what has been some of the impact that you felt on your organization, the people and the culture?
Yeah, sure. I think I would say there's two kinds of impact. One is just operational impact, because one of the things that's interesting about Spokeo is up to about 4 years ago, Spokeo has a no work from home policy, very similar to what Yahoo during the Melissa Myers tenures has. And even though we kind of relaxed it, but then 95% of all our teammates actually still all go to the office, right? And we're based in Pasadena, California, in the Los Angeles region. So when the COVID-19 happened, just operationally, there's a lot of things that we have to overcome. For example, like how do we IT-wise, like some folks have desktops, right? How do we order the laptops and all of these things? So there's a lot of operational things that we need to figure out. And fortunately, our team did figure it out within a week. So it's quite impressive. And just want to give a quick shout out to that. But there's a second aspect of it. Yeah, the second aspect of it is the culture aspect. The culture aspect is, for example, because pretty much everyone goes to the office, right? So we have a very, very tightly knit team. It's like people say it's kind of like a family, because in many ways, for a lot of people, they spend more time in the office than at home, right? Yeah. So for them, it's like a second home, essentially, right? So now that second home is no longer there, physically there. So how do we kind of carry that culture, the culture, and by the way, our culture is a culture of transparency. So how do we carry that transparent culture forward? That's another challenge that we have to figure out.
And then during this change, what aspect of the impact surprised you the most?
First of all, just like as I mentioned, I think operationally, the fact that our operations teams, whether it's the customer care team, the IT team, and our culture team, and by the way, we have a dedicated team, salaried employees, just focus on furthering our culture, right? So these three teams have done a phenomenal job just to operationally, just to get us from basically all on-site operation to all remote within a week or a week and a half. So I think that's really, really amazing, and that stood out to me. But the second thing I think is just how smoothly it has this experience has been. Actually, we recently used a tiny post basically every month, but the most recent question that we asked is, how does basically the remote work arrangement affect your performance, right? Do you see it as a positive, negative, or neutral? And majority of people see it as positive, right? 60% of people see it as positive. So I thought that's one of the things that's a little bit surprising. And I think even after the pandemic is over, I think the future of work is going to change. I think for an organization like us 4 years ago, where we have a no remote policy, and now I think we're a lot more open-minded. And for sure, after this pandemic is over, we're going to have a more flexible work schedule.
Well, that's a topic of conversation that I talk with my CEO peer group over and over again is, most people, at least if they're in, you know, a white collar office environment, say they are at least as productive, if not more productive right now. But then you have Satya Nadella of Microsoft saying, well, part of it could be we have accumulated this social capital over time. And, you know, we're unknowingly dwindling that social capital, and that's enabling us to be very productive. And then in the future, it might introduce new friction. So I'm just curious, as you balance that, have you made a decision moving forward as to what you're going to do after this pandemic? You did say that you'll be more flexible, but did you outline any policies that you can share?
So at this moment, our teams, the culture team, the HR team are still working on that policy, but we've started about a month ago because we do have a realization that the future of work is not going to be the same, right? So while I know that directionally it's going to be more flexible, right? It's going to be more results oriented, and it's still going to be very culture focused, right? But that said, we don't have a specific policy that's finished yet.
Got it. So forthcoming. Great. And, you know, I read this post that you wrote about, you know, how core values can help guide employees during the pandemic. And it really caught my attention. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And so tell me about the value that you see in your culture and core values, and how that may have been the same, highlighted even more, or since COVID-19 has hit.
Yeah, so we have a culture of transparency. You know, the transparency is basically the theme of our entire culture. Now, because of our mission mission is to make the world around us more transparent. So culture, the internal aspect and the customer facing aspect, in theory, in brand theories, should be consistent, right? Yes. So that's why we have what's called culture of transparency, a transparent culture. So what does that mean, right? So we actually took quite a bit of steps to actually define how do we achieve this culture, this transparent culture, and what does that mean, right? And actually, core values, the definition of core value is how we should behave, and it's answering the question of how out of the why, what, how concentric circle. We use this core values, right, to actually outline how people can build a more transparent culture. And they are, you know, listen with empathy, ask the why, right, clarify with data, innovate to learn, collaborate to achieve, and insist on quality. So these are kind of our core values and outlines how we can build a transparent culture.
Yeah, well, that's great. So if other leaders are inspired to dive into this or potentially refresh their cultural values, can you share a little bit about like the how? Like, how did you instrument this? Because it can, you know, it could be like one person thought, was it just Harrison's idea, or like, you know, how did you you know, balance like the ideas of the co-founders versus the people? And so I think that how is something that people would really love to learn from.
We took a page from a data-driven approach. So we talk about what data-driven approach, right? In the data engineering world, there is a discipline called extract, transform, and load. So ETL. So there's this ETL discipline, and roughly how this process works is you get the data raw, and then you try to clean it, standardize it, map it, right? And then you try to transform it using business logic to what you want to be or what you want to use it for. And lastly, you present it. So that's roughly what the ETL process, how the ETL process works. And we take a page from that. And what we did is we actually survey our entire team. And then using a very exact definition, right? What do you think our core value, and core values define how we should behave, right? What do you think our core values should be? And then with a very, very exact definition. And then we gather all these data. And then what we do is we start clustering, we start cleaning them. So cleaning and standardization in this context is basically, for example, if there's synonym, very close synonyms, and we start grouping them, right? And once we do that, we cluster them by association, right? And then at the end of the day, this is what's surprising. We clustered it down to about 10 groups.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, there's a clear theme. What's surprising is what our entire team, right, defines
Mm-hmm.
our core value actually roughly map to problem solving techniques.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so with that realization, then I met, and then what I did is I mapped it to basically Six Sigma and Lean methodology. So for example, the sixth value called insist on quality actually mapped to the control concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
In, I think Lean methodology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so basically that's how we came up with the core values.
Mm-hmm.
Is we actually start by listening, and then we cluster them, and then at the end of the day, we kind of innovate by realizing that, hey, there's a certain pattern. And the pattern is our team's solution to solve a problem is very consistent with basically how human race solve problems for thousands of years. Mm-hmm.
Well, great. Well, thanks for walking us through that. And then two questions follow up is one, what was the timing? Like how long did it take for your team to do this if people are going to go down that path? And then two is, having core values and saying, ta-da is one thing, but then bringing it to life and reinforcing it. That's when I believe a lot of the hard work starts. And so what type of initiatives have you done on that part? So the timing and then initiatives to really bring it to life.
I was the one who led the effort, and it's my side gig. So it took like 6 months to come up with these. And actually, evangelizing core values is quite easy. And here's the reason. The reason is because everyone has a buy-in. That's the cool thing about data-driven approach. You cannot say, I don't agree with this, because you have a voice.
Yeah.
One of the problems with the top-down approach is when I say, hey, these are the core values, some people will be like, well, I don't agree. But in this case, most people have to agree because you all have a voice in it, right? So evangelizing using a data-driven approach is actually quite easy because everyone's voice actually gets considered from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. And then in terms of with this well-defined culture and then these values, and I'm sure it provides a social capital or organization resiliency. So when have you seen it pop out during this work from home, shelter at home situation where you're like, wow, I'm so glad we had invested in doing that exercise, and now it's really popped out to life and you get to see it and the benefits of that?
Yeah, I think the one of the importance of having a clear core value and having it in such a succinct way is that it actually aligns people, because we all play the game of like me say something to you, David, and David, you say something to John, and John said it to like Eric, and then what I say and what Eric said is completely different. We all play that game before. And what simplicity actually helps is that it helps make the communication a lot more robust, right? Because the chance of getting one word wrong after, is a lot lower than getting a sentence or in some case an essay wrong, right? So I think that's a key thing about having a very simple core value is that I think what it does is that it not necessarily introduce new concepts, right? But rather it highlights and emphasizes what people care about the most, right? I always told people that the problem, usually when people tell me a good new idea and things like that, the problem is usually not whether the idea is good or bad. The answer is always yes. The problem is what's the priority? Can you work on it first, right? So the same thing with culture. I think it's not necessary that, hey, these are the new ideas or something, but having a clear, defined, simple, easy to understand culture values. What it does is, one, it simplifies communication, and two, it highlights what we care about the most. It prioritizes what we care about the most, and that helps align the team around all the initiatives. Yeah.
Sure. And so with that 6-month process, it's bearing fruit now. If you had to go back in time and say, well, if this is something I learned through that 6 months and I could tell myself earlier to be more effective, like a best practice or a tip for that outcome to be even better, what do you think you've learned in that process if you had to do it again, or share that advice to someone else who's about to embark on that?
The sixth value of Spokeo insists on quality, as I mentioned, is the idea of control, the idea of continuous improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, culture is an ever-changing thing, and it needs to be calibrated. And actually, let me plug Tiny Post a little bit.
Yeah.
We use Tiny Post to calibrate our culture, our cultural values. So to answer your question, what things I would change? The truth is I won't change it. I think there are some things that needs to be changed, but as long as we do it like every year, I don't think we need to calibrate culture. And by the way, I don't have time to calibrate it every 3 months, right? Because at the end of the day, it's my side gig. But every year, that's fine, right? So if there's something that you don't like, or actually in most cases, because culture is a reflection of what you and who you are, and the who you are changes over time, right? So in most cases, if your culture has a slight change, then just calibrate it, just change it, and it's not that hard, because once you have like 6 things that pretty much everyone agree on, most of the time you're just changing that one thing or one little word.
Got it. Well, so let's bring it back to today. I know that you do, in response to COVID-19, I believe you've either ramped up the frequency of your AMA sessions so people can ask you anything, or the length of that. So can you talk about that and anything else that you've done in reaction to employee feedback to make them feel more safe and more able to give you inputs and hear from you directly?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a monthly company meeting, all hands company meeting, and because of COVID-19, we have to move it to virtually. Yeah. And actually, our team are the ones who actually propose actually having a weekly AMAs so that we have more, because in the beginning of the COVID-19, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Yeah. No one knows how long this will take. Like, when are we coming back? Blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of things that's happening. So our team is actually the one who proposed and came up with the idea, maybe we should do it more frequently and every week, in which I said, yeah, sure, that's fine, right? And so we did that. And I think it's a great thing because our very first value, and it's first for a reason, because it's the most important one. The first value is listen with empathy, right? And the reason why listening is very important is because if you don't even know what the problem, how do you solve them, right? Yeah. Using Wikipedia definition of product is a solution to customer problems, right? Now, if you don't even know what customer problems are, how do you solve them? So I think having this AMA is great because now I can actually hear exactly what are people's concerns. So to give a most recent example, this just came out about 3 weeks ago in the AMA. People are asking if they could get internet reimbursement, right? So I didn't think about that because I had good internet for a long time. So I was like, oh, okay, that's a good thing. So yeah, we reacted and say, hey, let's do an internet reimbursement, right? And then there's a lot of questions like, oh, what will happen like when the office opens up, right? Do we have to wear a face mask? Should we have a plexiglass between desks and things like that? So I think a lot of these concerns, the truth is, if we don't listen, if I don't listen, I wouldn't thought of it, or I wouldn't be aware that they are there. And if I'm not even aware the problem exists, how do I even solve them, right? So I do think it is quite a good thing to have it on a weekly basis so that when there are concerns, we can hear it firsthand.
So we'll wrap it up on the last question is for other leaders who are going through COVID-19, which everyone around the world is, what would be like one best practice or tip that you've done or you read about that you've implemented that you really like that you'd like to share so that they can decide if that's a great idea for them to incorporate into their work style?
Yeah, I think it harkens back to my earlier answer. I think it comes down to listening, right? So
Mhm.
AMA is just one way of listening. We have other ways, right?
Yeah.
For example, tiny posts. We have Slack channels, right?
Mhm.
As I mentioned, we have a dedicated team just focused on culture, right? And
Mhm.
our culture not just organize events, but those events and actually initiatives all tied to our 6 core values, you know.
Awesome.
And actually the most important part is listen with empathy, right?
Mhm.
So I think, as I mentioned, every company has different cultures, right? Because at the end of the day, culture is a reflection of who you are.
Yeah.
And who you are is very different from company to company. So I don't think there's a one size fits all solution, but I do think it all starts with listening, right? Because if you don't listen, how do you even know how to solve the problem?
Brilliant last words. Well, thank you so much, Harrison, and best of luck moving forward.
Yeah, you too. You too, David.